Hello and welcome, Queer Subs. This is the Queer Dom's newest video series where I do a little doodle and talk about all things writing or art. Right now on the screen, I am working on the first chapter of one of my graphic series. It's called Cryptic Magic. I've been wanting to work on this story for a while, and even though I've done a lot of concept art and scene writing, I haven't really committed to sitting down and making the physical comic yet. So I'm gonna selfishly use this series as a way to actually start some of my stories. So as you can see on the screen, I'm just kind of coloring in some line art I've already done for this chapter. This comic in particular is supposed to be a kind of cartoonish style. It's based off of Magical Girl series. And so when I was first drawing this chapter, I wasn't really too focused on making things look realistic. I wasn't too focused on making sure my art was perfect, because I kind of liked the almost messy style that I accidentally had on these characters. I especially love the goofiness almost of the lack of realism. Like with Roscoe the dog on the screen, he's very triangular, very rectangular, doesn't really look too much like a dog, which he's not supposed to, and that's perfect. And he looks more like a rectangular sausage in most of his cameos, if you will. And Lynn, the main character on the screen, whenever I'm drawing her kind of in the background or doing something physical that doesn't necessarily need a moment of pause for the reader, I don't really focus too much on the detail. I felt like if I focus too much on the detail for these comics, I won't want to do them. And that's perfectly fine. As a writer or an artist, if you don't want to do something over and over and over again, you probably shouldn't, because then you won't ever, get to doing it. So when it came to this chapter, I kind of put aside my thoughts and feelings of perfectionism so that I could focus on just getting this thing done. Because it is the first chapter, I'm not too worried about how well it is perceived, how well it turns out. I kind of enjoy looking at works where you can tell that the author or the illustrator kind of grew with their story. Really good examples you can find on something like webtoons, where artists just seem to kind of grow with their own work, and you can tell in their style and their way of writing and the new stories that they're presenting. So that's kind of the take I took on this. And just a small bit of advice for anyone who's trying to write a story or draw a comic: you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to try and perfect everything to its fullest potential, or whatever you want to call it. And specifically, you don't need to do that for every single panel of every single chapter. If you do that, you're going to wear yourself out. And if we're being honest here, readers' eyes fly across the page so fast that you really only need the most perfect of perfect panels when you need to take a moment and let the reader be in the story and breathe in that moment. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about this story. I do post a lot of concept art and miniature scenes on my social media, but because I've never actually, finished this first chapter, it's not exactly a well-known story of mine, and I don't really have a lot of published works, and by a lot, I mean any, and that's okay. I'm a beginner, and I'm hoping that my audience, you are also a beginner. If not, and you're just kind of getting started, you already have a work out, you just want to learn a little bit more, see what other people are doing, yay, follow us along. But I'm going to be honest, while I went to college for things like this, I'm not published. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. And that's why I'm kind of using this story as a practice. And because the story is already well written in terms of, what I've already done so far, it's a pretty easy story to practice with because I have the lines, I have the scenes, I have the concept, so I can just play around with it and grow with it as I please. So yeah, let's get into what exactly the story is. Cryptic Magic is about a family of 5 sisters, all adopted, who are touched by magic that is kind of related to cryptic beasts and monsters that we know in local lore or legends and things like that. So our main character here, Lynn, for example, she is the magical girl version of Mothman. And she's actually the reason I started this series. It kind of started as a joke between my friends and I. What if I made Mothman a magical girl? And then it just went on from there. You can tell I take a lot of inspiration from magical girl series because of different references that I add on into this series. Like the 2 buns on top of Lynn's head are supposed to a reference to Sailor Moon, which is one of my favorite magical girl series. It's probably the magical girl series that everyone knows. A lot of the personality in the characters are also influenced by characters in Sailor Moon. A lot of the elements that I use in the art on the comic itself very much inspired by shoujo manga. Like you can see here, I have flower stamps. I also have shoujo bubbles, kind of just everywhere. I seem to overuse them a little bit on this first part of the first chapter, and I learned my lesson after that. So the second chapter, I'm going to use them a little less, save them for the big moments. With this particular series, I kind of wanted to focus on the meaning of a found family, and what it means to become a family rather than just being in one. And the relationship that these sisters develop over time is what I'm mainly focusing on in the series. So with this first chapter, you kind of start off with Lynn going to this new school, just adopted by a new family, and she hasn't met her sisters yet. And as she's going through her first day, she goes and she meets all her sisters kind of unexpectedly, and they're all so incredibly different from each other, she doesn't really put 2 and 2 together. In addition to meeting these characters, of course, she meets the dog Roscoe. Roscoe is your typical animal figure that you'd find in any magical girl series. That's one of my favorite tropes. You know, you have Luna and Artemis from Sailor Moon. You have that bunny thing from Madoka Magica. Shugacharo, you don't really have any animals, I don't think, but you do have the little egg things. I forgot what they're called. It's been a while since I watched Shugachara. So you have this otherworldly being who comes in, introduces the magic to these characters, and as they go along with their regular lives, they realize, oh, our lives aren't going to be so regular anymore. So on the screen right now, this is actually the first part of the chapter. I kind of worked backwards, where I was working on the second part of the first chapter first, just so I can have the full thing to look at. And then I went back and kind of redid a couple of things I didn't like in the first part and edited the second part as well. There's still a couple of things I don't necessarily like in this first chapter, but I'm going to leave them anyways, just kind of as an example. Because like I said, this is my practice work, and I want to use it on this channel to kind of show how I write, what I've learned, how to write, how I draw, how I interpret themes, things like that. One of these videos, I want to go back to this chapter and go over what I put down and show you how I edit based on what I learned in college and from other published writers and working editors. Because while in the industry, you're going to have your own separate editor usually, it is still good to know how to look at your own work critically and pick out what's important and what's not, what's working and what could be improved on. And it's also very important if you get an editorial job, because you might not just be a writer, you might not just be an artist, you might be someone that reviews content. It usually goes hand in hand. So yeah. On the screen right now is one of my favorite sisters, Connie. Don't tell the other sisters. But she's just a big ball of anxiety and I love her for it. I also especially love the character development that I eventually give her. I think the way that she grows into herself, I worked on a lot more than I did with the other characters. Now, I know that I said that I didn't particularly care how perfect this comic was going to be, and you can really tell in the line work itself and the shading. It's just a regular purple low opacity shading technique that you kind of first learn before you get into more digital art. Because I wasn't really too worried about how off it would look, because the imperfections itself make me want to do more. My goal is to make as many imperfections as possible and then correct it later on. Which, if you listen to our podcast, Queer Dom Queries, on Spotify, you actually learn a little bit about our shitty first draft and our thoughts on it if you want to go check that out. On the screen right now is my character Penny. She's a very tough character. She's really heavily influenced by Mars from Sailor Moon. You can tell a little bit from the way that I made her hair. You can also see in this scene that the backgrounds I'm really not too focused on. I'm not very good at doing backgrounds right now. I'm still practicing on my own, but I'm also not too worried about them. If I need to add a background for the reader to understand where exactly the characters are, I will put it. But otherwise, I need to focus on the characters. That's where my story is mainly focused on anyways, so I don't really worry too much about it. You'll also see on the background I use a lot of Ben-Day dots, which are those little dots that are very patterned in the background. You see them a lot in art. It was a result of printing comics way back when, and it just happened to show up on a lot of the comics. I quite like the style of the dots. They add a particular kind of shading that I adore, so I use them a lot because of that. I also just really enjoy not having to draw line after line or doing paint strokes. Using the dots is really helpful. I just use a paintbrush that came with my Photoshop program that uses those dots in particular. There's two different kinds. I'm still trying to figure out which one I like more. One's a little bit more spacious between the dots and has larger dots, whereas the other one has smaller ones with less space. I'm leaning more towards the first option. But like I said, I'm going to test it out. As far as what exactly I'm going to do with this story, I'm not completely sure. I want to publish it, obviously. Will I put it on something like Webtoons, or just put it as a regular comic on my Instagram? I'm not completely sure. Like I said, it's my tester story, so maybe I'll do a collection of different things, see what works out. I'm also doing this kind of as personal research, just to see what gets the most views, what works the most in my particular lifestyle. Just gathering research and evidence and statistics, or whatever you want to call it, just to see where exactly stories go nowadays. Which, if you guys are interested in learning about the industry, statistics, how well certain stories do, what exactly gets the views, all those things that I already know, instead of just doing this particular research by myself, I'm happy to share that kind of knowledge. Just comment down below. Maybe I can make a video about it, or I can just make a simple post on the queerdom.com, or I can have Andy, my lovely business partner, post it on one of our social medias. Just let us know. So this panel on screen is perfect in what I was talking about earlier with the two different varying dot sizes. So you have on the wall itself the larger dots with the larger space, and in the doorway that Roscoe is running into is a smaller dot pattern. And I added this to my personal comic vocabulary of using the smaller dots to kind of represent more empty or darkly lit things, and the larger dots as something a little bit more forward in perception. I should also bring up what exactly a comic vocabulary is. Your comic vocabulary is very important. That's my personal opinion. But it's very important because it describes the different symbols that you use in your comics, your graphics, your stories. So like with this particular story, I use a lot of colors to represent characters. Green for Connie, blue for Penny, purple for Lynn. And I kind of use that consistently throughout the story. I also use the dots a certain way, like I just mentioned. I also use the shoujo bubbles or the shoujo flowers for certain characters or for certain moments. For instance, I use a lot of the flowery type of floral almost patterns for Connie because she has a more foresty background. And having this is important because your readers are going to get more involved in your story, kind of delve deeper into what exactly you're putting on the page when you have that vocabulary, that kind of subliminal message almost, because your readers will be invested in what you put on the page about each character. You can see on the screen right now, I'm also adding word bubbles to my pages. I have a lot of difficulty with this, particularly because for this particular chapter, I did not plan ahead. Some of the panels I kind of did, kind of put a small space for where I wanted the word bubbles to be, but mostly I did not. I highly suggest planning out your word bubbles ahead of time, especially if you've already written a script beforehand. It makes it a lot easier to continue on when you know where you're supposed to draw and where you're supposed to write. And I think I'm going to go ahead and end this doodle here for today. I will be going back to this chapter more in depth, and I will explain the editing process and what decisions I chose to make versus the ones in the original draft. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this kind of content, comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. Check out more of the Queer Domain's content and services at thequeerdom.com, and visit our various social medias in the description below for any updates. Thank you so much, and I will see you all next time.